Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I hope this talk is not too verbose. I had a lot to say for some reason, and boy, so this talk is in. I don't know why I get so nervous. I've been giving talks for years, and I'm always nervous. But anyway, this talk is entitled "Zen in the Time of COVID." It's a takeoff on a Gabriel Garcia Marquez title of a novel called Love in the Time of Cholera. I haven't read it. I've read his most famous novel, which is 100 Years of Solitude. Great book. I wanted a literary reference in keeping with Steve Matushak's highly literary talk on Wednesday a few weeks ago. I think it was Wednesday. So I want to thank a number of people for the inspiration for this talk. Warren Lang for his recent talk, Steve Hagen for his class on Monday, Dokai Georgeson for his talk last Sunday. I also appreciated Shokin Weinkauf's talk, but I have trouble staying seated contentedly on my horse. I've wanted to dismount many times, especially recently, but I want to show you something. Well, never mind, I'll show you that later. So a while back, Warren Lang was asked a question at the end of his talk about mindfulness. This was several weeks ago. The question, as I recall it, and I don't remember who asked it, could a sniper who has a target in his sights and is getting ready to pull the trigger to bring the target down be considered mindful in the intensity of his concentration, determination, attention, stillness, and focus? And I would say those words could apply to a sniper about to shoot somebody. Warren agreed that this was a difficult question. If I remember correctly, he conceded yes, perhaps the sniper could be considered to be mindful in that moment under those circumstances. I felt that needed more addressing. I think this is both a difficult question and an easy one. Very difficult, but also easy. It contains a trap, and I'm sorry I keep saying I'm nervous. It contains a trap, the word mindfulness. By the definition proposed by the person who asked the question, yes, then the sniper was practicing mindfulness. Now for the easy part. What was the sniper's intention? As Steve Hagen has pointed out repeatedly, one of the Buddha's great insights was that regarding intention. Intention is a teaching on wisdom. Intention in this teaching refers to the mind and the heart of the sniper. What is his intention? Does it involve a self, an ego, a belief in substantiality, substance, svabhava, own being? Does it involve possibly a misunderstanding of reality with a capital R? Is his intention coming out of the whole, of totality, of the reality of inseparability? Or is it coming out of ego, desire, seeking to achieve something in the service of the ego? Is his target perceived as irreparably separate from him? What is the sniper grasping at, possibly, when he takes aim at his target in his stealthy, very carefully planned and executed way? I cannot know the mind and heart of anyone except myself. That's it. However, given the circumstances, my guess would be that the sniper has a very well-formed concept or conceptualization of the target, of what he is hoping to achieve or get from the shooting, of his belief in the utter separateness of himself and the target, and his belief that killing the target is, for whatever reason, a desirable goal and is unquestioned thereby. The sniper may be grasping at the idea of a separate self. Perhaps the sniper feels that unless he shoots the target, his own self is in danger. And that may very well be true, or his whole platoon is in danger, whatever. He fails to see the grasping, that he has grasped hold of the belief that his life is separate and distinct from that of the target, that he is real and substantial, and that similarly, the target out there is real and substantial. There is the belief, possibly, again, I cannot know this person's mind, his or hers, that therefore the target's life, can come to an end, and that the sniper's life can continue. This is the belief in the extremes of birth and death. As will be pointed out in an upcoming class on wisdom, this belief is one of the chains in the 12-fold chain of causation. I also talked about this in my 4-week class. So I may not be conveying the point here. So in meditation, the practice is just to see our rigidly held beliefs about separateness, and just to be awake to them. They can be very subtle. I liked Steve's discussion last Monday night, I think it was Monday night, when he was talking about Katagiri, of the very important distinction between giving up and not quitting. This is the distinction he learned from Katagiri. That giving up, as I understood it, meant the relinquishing of views, of beliefs. Belief in or about anything formed or conceptualized. Belief in the substantiality of a separate ego self, for example. Belief in I, ego, me, self, and then out there. So that's what he means. That's what I understood him to mean by learning from Katagiri what giving up is. Giving up or relinquishing those ideas, just letting them go. He also talked, I think, about letting go of the belief that enlightenment is a goal to be attained in meditation. Forgive yourself. If you have this belief, just forgive yourself. Or that there is something to get from practice, whether it be wisdom, self-awareness, understanding, mindfulness, you name it. The belief in good versus evil. That's just letting go of that, is the giving up, as I understood Steve to mean what he had learned from Katagiri. But then he talked about that, and he made a distinction between giving up and not quitting. This was great because it actually was a reference to the importance of the Sangha to our practice. He said, this is not, quitting is something entirely different. It's not, so not quitting is not giving in, not throwing in the towel when it comes to practice. This is tempting. I've felt that way. Not real strongly, but I have felt that way. Steve acknowledged that there were 3 or 4 times after he met Katagiri, such as during sessions, and if I'm misquoting him, forgive me, that he felt like quitting, like throwing in the towel, like conceding defeat, like it was all too much. And then he said something very difficult. He said something very interesting. He cited the Sangha. He cited people with whom he was practicing as inspirations to keep practicing. People such as Norm and Robert Wahlberg, I really like that because I tend to forget the importance of the Sangha to my practice. And when I see you guys, when I give these Zoom talks, I'm so grateful that you're here. I really appreciate it because I could not do this without the support of the Sangha. None of us could really. So Steve's point was really excellent. So not to quit is, to paraphrase Shogun Weinkopf, just to stay seated on your horse. Whatever your horse does, just to stay seated on your horse. I need to quote the Shin Ming here. That's always my fallback. The Shin Ming says, "The great way is not difficult. There is nothing it prefers. Only when you neither love nor hate does it appear clearly without disguise." So the great way has no preferences. It can't possibly. This is a reference to wholeness or totality, which includes everything and excludes nothing. There are no preferences. Everything is permitted or allowed, including snipers and targets, including good and evil, including quitting, including not relinquishing your views, including you name it. All of this is included and not excluded. It has no preferences, the great way. Think of any opposition you can think of. It's all included. And actually, these are all just like these opposites, good and evil, right and wrong, gain and loss, as the Shin Ming says. These are all concepts anyway, but they all show up in wholeness, in totality, and we cannot deny their appearance. We can't. They show up. But their illusory nature can be seen directly. They remain illusory then, and they don't become delusion. If we don't grasp at them, believe in them, think that they are substantial and real, then they remain illusory appearances that come and go, that constantly change. Even if you have tightly held rigid beliefs, you might notice that over time, even these start to change. They take slightly different shapes, but just keep noticing. So, in other words, when we don't believe in these appearances as real and substantial, then we're not taken in by them. We see their illusory quality, even if only for a moment. So to return to the Shin Ming, this only when you neither love nor hate does it appear clearly without disguise is a reference to acting without intention, without grasping, without trying to achieve something you want or desire, or to get rid of something you don't want, or even hate. This is acting out of wholeness. This is, as Steve says, to see the whole. So, if anything might seem abstract, perhaps it is speaking of seeing wholeness. Steve addresses this beautifully in his book, ta-da, The Grand Delusion. There it is. On page 170, there's a dialogue about a truly moral basis for action. Anyone, the interlocutor says, so on what basis can we find a foundation for morality if we don't rely on what we believe to be good or bad, right or wrong? This is a very interesting question because it points to the very heart of what we do when we term something to be moral. We turn to our beliefs about what is right, what is good, what is wrong, what is bad. A very good question. It cuts to the heart of the nature of belief. Um, our reliance on reliance on what we believe to be true, real, and substantial. That's what it points to, our reliance on these beliefs. Concepts, ideas of good and bad, right and wrong, they seem so straightforward, so clear, like the belief possibly held by the sniper. He's doing the world a good turn by getting rid of the enemy. After all, it's so obvious. In reply, Steve says, morality comes out of seeing wholeness, which doesn't require any underlying belief. Indeed, belief puts up barriers just to seeing, just seeing. If you don't want to split the infinitive, just to seeing. Good and bad, right and wrong, they're concepts. Wholesomeness, awareness of the whole, is not. You can't turn it into a concept because you can't grasp it conceptually. Wholesomeness, awareness of the whole. I repeat that for emphasis. Awareness of the whole is wholesomeness. And remember, the whole excludes nothing. It includes everything. Good and bad, right and wrong, sniper and target, drone and whatever. So anyone, the interlocutor then says, wait, you use the terms wholesome and unwholesome. Aren't they a pair of opposites? Aren't they relative? This is also a very interesting question, especially since, in fact, Steve, in that particular passage, had not mentioned the term unwholesome. But in our conceptualizing, we tend to think in pairs of opposites with no in between. We tend to think in terms of extremes. So while Steve never said the word unwholesome, he did use the term wholesome, and the interlocutor's mind, our mind, and I can't speak for yours, only mine, goes right over to the opposite, wholesome, unwholesome. Steve responds, the whole of its very nature includes everything. It has no opposite. It no more dukes it out with unwholesomeness than the sky fights with clouds. On page 183, Steve cautions anyone against gripping his or her beliefs. He says, but we need to be careful when it comes to forming and using beliefs. We need to notice when we're gripping them too tightly. The key word here is notice. Anyone, the interlocutor, bless their heart, does not notice the word notice. They say, how do I know when I'm doing that? And Steve answers, it's a matter of attention. Just watch your mind. Anyone then grasps at an idea of that, a very common idea, and says, you mean get my mind under control? Very common idea. We want to get things under good control. And Steve answers, strictly speaking, it's not actually your mind, remember, and it's a matter of awareness, not of control. On page 184, anyone asks, awareness of what? That's great. Another very common question. Awareness of what? What? Tell me what to be aware of. Tell me. And Steve answers, aggravatingly, nothing in particular, just the whole. And anyone asks, just the whole? You mean everything? How can I be aware of all that? This is another very common idea about awareness of the whole that I confess to having asked myself also. Steve answers it very simple, really. Just notice whenever your mind is inclined toward this and away from that. Eventually, you'll realize that this mundane awareness is equivalent to seeing the whole. Anyone goes, huh? Steve says, just notice when you're angry or when you've begun to tighten down on a belief or a position, or when you're taking yourself too seriously, or when you've lost sight of the fact that you're only holding a mental model. Notice when in your mind you've frozen some aspect of the ever-changing world, including yourself, into a concept or an entity. Notice when you think you've actually got something there. You've gotten hold of it. You get it. And so then anyone asks, and then? And Steve answers, return to what appears here and now. One of the ways in which we can notice when we've frozen reality in this way is by noticing when we resort to thinking in terms of opposites, pairs of opposites, good versus bad, right versus wrong, wholesomeness versus unwholesomeness, alive versus dead, us versus them, self versus other. And I'm going to say something here that I'm probably going to have to return to in another talk. But the Shin Ching Ming talks about the pair, mind and thing. And so those are two things, mind and thing. And then the Shin Ching Ming says the thoroughgoing relativity of these two, of mind and thing, completely inseparable, completely dependent upon one another. Wait, are indistinguishable, and each contains within itself the whole world. I screwed that up, didn't I?
Not too bad.
Anyway, I'll come back to that. So notice when in your mind you've frozen some aspect of the ever-changing world, including yourself. Oh, I already read that to you. So these pairs of opposites, that's one way to notice when you're dealing with the conceptual, and that you've gotten maybe caught by one of those members of the pair, whether it be good or bad. I'm good, they're bad. One way to notice in which you've frozen out some idea about something. Since we are so accustomed to doing this and we do it repeatedly, it becomes easier and easier to see this with practice. To see when we're caught up in believing completely in how real and substantial the pair of opposites seems, and thus have lost sight of the whole. Now, I called Steve recently to thank him for this whole section on wholeness. A bit to my embarrassment, he reminded me that he had talked much earlier about this topic of seeing wholeness in his book, Buddhism Plain and Simple. I did not remember this at all. Once I found it and read it, I realized I had no idea. I did not understand what he was talking about at the time. I missed the wisdom in the teaching. So here's what Steve says on page 162 of Buddhism Plain and Simple. But while we can't know the details of the whole, the fact is that we, each one of us, already know the whole itself. There's nothing mysterious about reality. Thus, at all, it is ever present, clear, and obvious. Rather than trying to figure something out, trying to see, trying to reunite with the whole, rah-rah, All we have to do is notice whether our mind is leaning or not. I love that part about trying to reunite with the whole. I have, in meditation, tried to reunite with the whole. How do you do that? Conceptually. There's no other, you have some idea about reuniting, about the whole. But then that's as though I were ever apart from it, as though there had always existed some gap between me and the whole. As Dogen says in the Fukan Zazengi, which is Universal Recommendation for Zazen, wholeness, the way, is never apart from one, right where one is. Never apart from one, right where one is. What is the use of going off here and there to practice? And Dokai talked about this in his talk last Sunday. I'm going to get back to this. So Steve continues on page 162 of Buddhism Plain and Simple. When you notice that your mind is caught up in longing and loathing, leaning toward or away from something, don't try to stop it from leaning. As we've seen, trying to make a leaning mind stop leaning is just another form of leaning. And in parentheses, he's put, I really want not to have a leaning mind. In other words, I reject leaning mind. I want whole mind. So again, we have this pair of opposites. Just be aware of when your mind is leaning and realize what leaning of mind actually is, he says. With practice and attention to this moment, your mind will, of its own accord, lean less. Now, let me say this. Don't hold on to that and then expect something from your practice. I like what Steve says in The Grand Delusion, indirectly about practice. He's talking about true religious experience on pages 191, 192, and 193. He is contrasting religious experience with science. He says on page 191, science is at home in the conceptual. It belongs there. This is where it soars. It can't function freely anywhere else. On page 192, he says, unlike science, though, religion is not tethered to the conceptual. Thus, it's quite capable of directing our attention to truth, but only so long as it abandons belief. On pages 192 and 193 of The Grand Delusion, he talks about the dangers that advances in science have brought forth. He then says, but science has no built-in brake pedal. And although science accommodates curiosity, ingenuity, flexibility, and even self-correction, it reserves very little room for wisdom, awareness of the whole. Wisdom speaks to the human heart in ways that scientific analysis can never reach. Wisdom speaks to the human heart in ways that scientific analysis can never reach. I was very touched by this. Allowing wisdom to speak to the human heart is what we allow to function or to happen in meditation when we just sit without trying to grasp anything. This seems to me to be the only way wisdom can speak to the human heart, when our minds are more or less quiet, at ease, just allowing what shows up to show up without grasping or rejecting. Actually, this is wisdom. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm just saying, trust this, but don't believe me. But wisdom and the human heart are not two. To return to what Dokai said on Sunday, I really like Dokai's talk. He said, regarding what is the use of going off here and there to practice. I'm sorry, I know this, I'm jumping around a lot. So Dokai actually quoted a later part. Maybe I better stop. So let me stop with the part about wisdom speaks to the human heart in ways that scientific analysis can never reach. Are there any questions or comments so far? Because I'm going to move into a different area now. No?
Looks like you can go on, Mary. No questions or comments.
Okay. So Dokai actually quoted a later part of the Fukanza Zengi and pointed out an aspect about it I hadn't considered. He quoted, why leave behind the seat that exists in your home and go aimlessly off to the dusty realms of other lands? I had never thought of it in the way he talked about it. He applied this to noticing his own mind. It's going off to the dusty realms of other lands while meditating. It's leaving behind the home seat, which is awareness, body, mind, and breath. This is our true home. And believe me, this has been said many times before my saying it. Norm points this out all the time when he says, be the awakeness and awareness that you are. I like Dokai's pointing this out because it was humble, and it pointed to what I notice about my own mind in meditation. I was also impressed by the part of the talk, about the subtlety of the dissatisfaction that can creep, so to speak, into meditation. He talked about noticing a subtle dissatisfaction with here and now, with what is presenting in this moment, as though this moment were not enough, as though just here and now being present are not enough. This is subtle, as he pointed out. And I'm not saying try to manufacture this, try to notice this if this isn't what's happening. You don't have to. Eventually, something like this will come up. Just notice it when it shows up. I frequently notice my dissatisfaction, for example, with ideas of not making progress. Then I must forgive myself for them. I must let them go. Be gentle with yourself. Dokai also noted that in the first two lines of the Fukanza Zengi, Dogen says, the way is basically perfect and all-pervading. How could it be contingent upon practice and realization? He suggested that this is an expression of Dogen's suffering. What I made of that is that Dogen seems to be talking about some perceived lack or a gap in his practice and realization, a gap between the basic perfection and all-pervadingness of the way and practice and realization, somehow pointing to some gap there. I'm not sure this is what Dokai meant, but he saw that as an expression of Dogen's suffering, which is a very interesting interpretation. But later, Dogen seems to come to terms with this. Later in the Fukanza Zengi, when he says, the Zazen I speak of is not learning meditation. It is simply the Dharma gate of repose and bliss. The practice realization of totally culminated enlightenment. It is the manifestation of ultimate reality. Traps and snares can never reach it. Once its heart is grasped, you are like the dragon when he gains the water, like the tiger when she enters the mountain. For you must know that just there in Zazen, truth is manifesting itself. Truth is manifesting itself. Just as everything is manifesting truth, everything. And from the first, dullness and distraction are struck aside. Here, Dogen speaks of no gap between practice and realization. Truth in Zazen just manifests itself. This truth is always manifesting, as Steve points out. This is all we really know, truth, or can know. This is always our experience. In Zazen, perhaps, this absence of a gap can be seen more readily when we've quieted our bodies and minds. Norm calls Zazen the most concentrated form of Zen practice. But of course, this manifesting and practicing can go on in any activity. So I was also struck by the Buddha's discourse on right speech that Dokai talked about. I haven't read those passages from, I don't know which, I think he called them the Nikayas. There are a series of discourses, the short discourses, the middle length discourses, and the long discourses. And there is a place you can go to look these up. It's called suttacentral.net. That's SUTTACENTRAL.net. I forget who talked about this. It might have been Steve Batchelor who made a reference to this. But all of those discourses are referenced there. Anyway, Dokai talked about how basic the Buddha's discussion of right speech was. The wisdom to discern when and to whom to speak the truth is an example of the practice of wisdom and compassion. I frequently notice how lacking in compassion and certainly wisdom, what I want to say to people is, sometimes with many people, I'm okay. I can do okay. David, unfortunately, suffers the brunt of my difficulties with knowing when to exercise right speech. And I wanted to bring up one more thing that I hadn't written out. I was actually talking to a friend to whom I'd given Steve's book, The Grand Illusion. And this person had arguments with the book. This person found the book to have taken an adversarial negative stance that was disturbing to this person. I argued a little bit with this person. And then this person said, there really is no problem. There is no problem. Now, there is truth in that, but there's also a failure to see the other aspect of about that. So to say there really is no problem is to point to one of the two truths and to ignore the other of the two truths. And I'm going to read to you. So the two truths, basic, relative truth and absolute truth. And Steve talks about this, the interplay of these two as symmetry. So relative truth. Relative truth is everything that's showing up, everything that shows up, objects, appearances, time, space, motion, you, me, them, trees, grasses, pebbles, tiles, rivers, mountains, all of this showing up, constantly changing. This is relative truth. This is the world of appearances, and we cannot ever dismiss those appearances. Absolute truth, thus, wholeness, totality. I'm going to read what Steve says about this. So this is in page 195, called The Two Truths. He says, there are two truths. I've been alluding to them in various ways for some time now. Both refer to aspects of reality, that is, to aspects of mind. Taken together, they reveal a pattern that scientists have come to call symmetry. First, there's the conceptual, the conceived, the individuated, the divided, the particulate, the quantized. This is the fractured and multifaceted world of conceptual experience, the world of form and movement, time and space. It's the world of constant, thoroughgoing change. It's the familiar world that appears not to consciousness, but as consciousness, a very important distinction. This is reality with a small r. And this is what was ignored in what my friend, who was so well-meaning and so well-intentioned, said when he said, there is no problem. This ignores small r reality. Then there's the perceptual, the inconceivable, the singular. This is the timeless, the dimensionless, the seamless, the unchanging world of totality. The world as awareness. The world as mind. This is reality with a capital R. Norm points to this. He talks about a reality that's boundless, limitless, has no boundaries. He says, he applies many adjectives, which I can't come up with right now. So the first realm is the realm of relative truths, where there appears here as opposed to there, large as opposed to small, love as opposed to hate, good as opposed to bad. That's why the Shin Cheng Ming says, only when you neither love nor hate does it, the way, wholeness, totality, reality, can it appear clearly without disguise. We can't mistake it. Anyway, Steve goes on, all these other conceivable contrasts and dualities make up this relative world and indicate relative truth. The second truth is not relative to anything at all in particular. For lack of a better word, absolute truth, without reference to or the presumption of relative distinctions, such as location, size, dimension, change, or any other attribute that would seemingly belong to things. The first aspect, the relative aspect, appears dynamic. The second, eternal. All beliefs, well, I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to leave that apart, leave that aside, because he talks about the difference, about beliefs, religious beliefs, science, all of that. That's for another topic. So I've managed to make it past 10:45. It's now 10:47, and I'm done. Any questions or comments? Oh, so I do want to say one thing, because I think, I don't know, It was a difficult Thanksgiving. Oh, this is not important, but I do want you, so the day before Thanksgiving, I got tested for COVID. I'm negative. Yippee. Okay, questions or comments?
Yeah, looks like you have a question or comment. Why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself? Ken?
There we go. That's better, isn't it? Yeah, is that coming through? Okay, okay. Mary, first of all, thank you for an absolutely fascinating talk. I wonder if I could just pick up on something that you said right early on about the importance of the Sangha. This is a comment really rather than a question.
Yes.
I'm sitting over here in the UK with absolutely no Sangha whatsoever. My practice is totally solitary. Up until the beginning of our what seems like an endless COVID lockdown, at which point things changed. My usual, if you like, focal point is to download the Dharma Field Sunday Talk and listen to it on my iPod. When you changed to doing the Zoom talks, things changed absolutely dramatically for me. I now have a Sangha.
Yes.
I don't know whether my practice has actually improved or not. I'm not sure that I can be in a position to judge that. But certainly my enthusiasm for the practice has changed radically. And this is truly the one positive factor of the COVID-19 pandemic for me. So I'd just like to really, from a personal perspective, thank you for raising that and just reinforce what you said.
You're welcome. You are Sangha. It's a pleasure to see you. It's a pleasure to see everyone. And whether or not the Zoom talks continue, Sangha is not, again, Sangha is not limited by boundaries. And that's, that sounds easy to say, and I appreciate what you're saying. And don't worry about your practice. I want to say that. Don't judge your practice. When you do meditation instruction here at Dharma Field, one of the things they teach you is there are three very important things. One is to practice with regularity, to set a schedule for sitting, and then sit according to that schedule, whether you feel like it or not. The second thing is, to the best of your ability, to practice with others. That's a whole other topic. There's an aspect of wisdom to that requires a whole, a whole discussion. But then there's the aspect of not judging your practice. So don't judge your practice. Just whatever shows up, be grateful for it. And if it's whatever it is, just let it go. Just return to awakeness and awareness. But you are Sangha. I'm grateful to all of you. I'm grateful to all of you. Thank you all so much. What can I say?
Thank you.
I just want to say that in our chat room, a lot of people have been echoing what Ken talked about, people from
Yes.
around the world who are
Yes.
experiencing something similar. So
Thank you all. Thank you.